March 3rd, 1946. The quiet town of Texarkana is changed forever when a mysterious killer known only as the Phantom begins his reign of terror. December 24th, 1976. The Phantom is given new life in Charles Pierce and Earl Smith's The Town That Dreaded Sundown, skirting the line between real-life horror and fiction. October 16th, 2014. The Phantom returns in a story that seeks to bring closure that neither film nor reality could ever provide. If horror is designed to help us face our fears in fictional forms, then what does a film that portrays a real-life unsolved crime tell us about ourselves? The Town That Dreaded Sundown is part slasher, part detective mystery, and altogether the story of a small town seized by unknowable evil. It's also a forgotten pillar of the slasher subgenre, and that alone would make it worthwhile to watch and talk about. But what makes it far more fascinating to me is how it bridges the gap between true crime and movie slashers. Taking inspiration from the real-life Texarkana Moonlight Murders and presenting a semi-fictionalized account in an almost documentary format, Sundown is the type of movie that looks to disturb as much as it does to detail. And in this cross-section of reality and horror lies the banality of evil. Almost 40 years later, The Town That Dreaded Sundown received a legacy sequel with a film bearing the exact same name. But where the original sought to provide unresolved mysteries and scares, this belated continuation aimed to provide closure and finality, even when its decades-later story had no relation to reality. This is a trip back into the real and fictional murders that shook Texarkana. This is a return to the true crime terrors of The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Psycho, Peeping Tom, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Black Christmas, and Halloween are all cited as the films that helped form the slasher. But The Town That Dreaded Sundown isn't just a forgotten pillar. It's a must for anyone trying to understand horror's blurry relationship with real-life tragedy. And it all begins shortly after the end of World War II. From February 22nd through May 3rd, 1946, 5 people were killed and 3 more near fatally injured by a serial killer that came to be known as the Phantom Killer, only described as a large man in a white mask with 2 holes cut out for his eyes. 4 separate attacks made up the Phantom's killing spree, and each targeted couples. All of them in cars in secluded areas except for the final attack at a farmhouse, and all done with a pistol or rifle. Over the following weeks, fear of the Phantom grew across the Texarkana area, which straddles the Texas-Arkansas border, Twin Cities, and their 2 surrounding counties. The crimes caused widespread paranoia, attracted national news attention, and brought local, state, and federal law enforcement investigations. But just like that, the Phantom was gone, never caught and never officially identified. What happened to him? Did he die? Was he arrested for a different crime? Did he move on to a different hunting ground? The Texarkana slangs all happened decades before the term serial killer was first used in the 70s. But like many unsolved serial killer cases over the decades, the identity of the Phantom Killer and the events in Texarkana have been scrutinized by both police and citizens over and over, leading to many different suspects being called the true identity of the murderer. But no definitive proof exists. At the time of the murders, Charles B. Pierce was only 8 years old and living in nearby Hampton, Arkansas. The stories of the Phantom frightened Pierce as a young boy, who went on to have a career in film. With his 1972 breakout, The Legend of Boggy Creek, a true independent picture, funded by small businesses and premiering without a distributor, but bringing the level of success needed to launch Pierce's directorial career. Eventually, Pierce and screenwriter Earl E. Smith, who also wrote Boggy Creek, decided to turn those old fears of the Phantom into a film. Premiering on December 24, 1976, The Town That Dreaded Sundown acts as a fictionalized document of the Texarkana murders. The names of the officers and victims have been changed, as well as some of the details of the circumstances, especially those of the attacks where both victims were killed. But just like real life, Sundown details the months-long attack of the Phantom Killer and the police that tried to catch him. I think what's important to understand is that while you can absolutely see how the Town That Dreaded Sundown fits into the ancestry of the slasher subgenre, it doesn't fit nearly as neatly into it as the 5 other founding films. These 5 movies are much more focused on the kills and thrills in their structures, which would be the reason for the existence of most slasher movies that followed. Sundown is structured much more like a documentary, complete with voiceover narration throughout that helps the audience understand the context of the murders and investigation. The voiceover by Vern Stearman goes so far as to claim that everything you're about to see really happened.
The incredible story you are about to see is true. Where it happened and how it happened. Only the names have been changed.
Of course, that's not entirely true, but Sundown's real-life inspiration and its interest in portraying a true unsolved series of killings is what gives the film its documentary feel. The Phantom's attacks are just as important to the film's focus as its depictions of everyday life in Texarkana, the police procedures, and the people affected by the killer. I don't think that Sundown ever revels in its killings. Pierce's direction and Jim Roberson's cinematography provide a starkness that keeps its kills from feeling flashy and fun. The film is grainy, the colors are often muted and washed out, the darkness of the night is pitch black. That creates a sense of caught-in-the-moment photography that really aligns well with the film's commitment to making it all feel like authentic recreation. Too many flashy camera moves or editing that draws attention to itself would break that sort of immersive quality. That said, I think that this is a really stylishly atmospheric movie because it's trying to make you feel like you're actually there where it all really happened. Sundown may take place during spring, but it was shot in June and July across Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texarkana, Texas. This is a hot weather horror movie, which is one of my favorite types, contrasting carefree nature, bright sun, and endless possibilities with a psychotic killer that snuffs it all out. That's what adds to the tragedy of this movie. Pierce takes the time to show you a little of each victim's life before the attack, illustrating them as normal, likable people who have no idea what awaits them, which is made obvious by the film detailing date, time, and place for these scenes.
Now it is a rainy Saturday night, March 24th, 1946, 21 days after the attack on Lover's Lane.
The Phantom does most of his killing on the secluded edges of town, but as a person, he's a direct result of sexual repression and hidden mental illness. The fact that we never see the Phantom unmasked, and that stuntman Bud Davis doesn't play anyone else in the movie, means we can never really say, oh, that's him in the crowd, or that's him back there in that shot. The Phantom is always there and never there. A lot of the acting in Sundown is, well, lacking. Most of the actors who bring the victims to life are only here for 1 or 2 scenes, but have some pretty stiff line readings.
Well, how about our favorite spot over in Spring Lake Park?
Gee, I don't know. We've had lots of warnings not to park.
Maybe that's part of the charm to me. After all, if we look at Sundown like one big true crime reenactment, the acting makes sense. Not to shit on people that act in those sorts of TV shows, but I don't think you're finding top-of-the-line actors in the latest episode of Unsolved Mysteries. But my big gripe with the movie is the injection of some comic relief with bumbling cops. Specifically, the cop character of Sparkplug, played by Pierce himself, and not based on any real person, is made into the fool, complete with on-the-nose womp-womp music cues. He's a well-meaning dummy that doesn't so much get in the way of the investigation as he does get in the way of the film's execution. Sundown is a pretty serious film. Not grim, but straightforward. No nonsense for the most part. And like the larger tone of the movie, its characters are average people living regular lives, which makes the killings of the Phantom so dark and disturbing. This is long before the trend of big, loud, and annoying slasher victims that make you root for the killer. And because of its documentary-like shape, Sundown doesn't exactly have a main character, as it changes focus from scene to scene. But the closest we get are Ben Johnson as Texas Ranger Captain J.D. Morales and Andrew Prine as Deputy Norman Ramsey, both based on real lawmen. In the end, the police aren't super cops. They don't have Sherlock Holmes on the team, and they don't catch the Phantom because of the realities of the case, bad luck, and the killer's methods, not because they're idiots. They're clearly very competent, insightful, and caring. A killer that can get away from capable police is scary. One that can evade dummies isn't. Without Sparkplug's antics, I think Sundown would be scarier. To some degree, slasher fans always root for the killer. Some more than others for sure, and it's the ones that garner that love that become icons, coming back again and again so we can spend some more time with them. The Phantom doesn't really create that sort of love, and it's because he's given so little time on screen to maintain his mystery, which strips him of any real personality or iconography, and because his crimes are so brutal and clearly caused by sexually motivated psychosis. The Phantom targets couples, attacking them when they're isolated and vulnerable, and focusing on the women. Most of his attacks aren't shown in detail, but we're told he bites and chews on the breasts and butt of one female victim, but he doesn't rape them. The methods of the Phantom are so close to the reality of actual serial killers, not just the real Phantom of Texarkana, but the Zodiac Killer, Son of Sam, the BTK Killer, and more, that he has no suspension from reality like the characters of Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, or Chucky, who let us indulge in fear in the most enjoyable ways possible. But really, the Phantom is most like Michael Myers, a similar mask-wearing shape of a man whose true motivations can never really be understood, at least in the first film. But Carpenter's original Halloween only spends a few minutes forming the legend of Michael Myers, before jumping ahead to him haunting the town of Haddonfield. Sundown is all about the creation of a legend, and how they can never really be left in the past. However, the Phantom isn't an emotionless figure of terror like Myers. Every killing is filled with angry, panting, sexual compulsion simmering underneath that baghead. Speaking of, the Phantom's look here is the clear inspiration for Jason Voorhees' appearance in Friday the 13th Part 2, just with an extra eye hole. The Phantom's trombone kill is the standout slasher moment of the movie, a strange and inventive death that feels the most like the films that would come a decade later. But even then, it's far more uncomfortable, brutal, and sad than what most slashers are known for. And like Halloween, the end of Sundown begins to break the barriers and safety of film. John Carpenter's film ends with revisiting the scenes of Michael Myers' killings, with the Shape's heavy breathing telling us he's still out there. He could be anywhere, even waiting for us at home. Sundown closes out its story by letting us know what happened to everyone involved, except for the Phantom, who also could be anywhere, even attending a showing of the movie we're watching right now. It's a fucking genius move, haunting to watch decades later, but surely terrifying when seen in theaters during its premiere. And that's what I love so much about the original Town That Dreaded Sundown. It's not a cathartic movie. It doesn't let us move past some very real fears. In fact, it makes us sit with them even more, and refuses to provide closure because there was none in real life. Its legacy sequel, almost 40 years later, tries to do the exact opposite. Pierce was a true blue Arkansas filmmaker for his entire life. Someone interested in the life of his neighbors, and dedicated to depicting both the past and present of his home with a sense of authenticity. To this day, the Little Rock Film Festival's highest honor is the Charles B. Pierce Award for Best Film Made in Arkansas. But you probably wouldn't be surprised if I told you that The Town That Dreaded Sundown was met with controversy when it was released, due to its closeness to the real-life tragedy. Texarkana city officials sued to remove the film's slogan claiming that the Phantom still lurks the streets of Texarkana, Arkansas, emblazoned on the fantastic poster by Ralph McQuarrie in 1977. Gotta be bad for tourism. Mark Melton Moore sued Pierce for $1.3 million over invasion of privacy for his sister's depiction as one of the victims. But time heals all wounds, and what was first a controversial legacy for Texarkana became a tradition, as The Town That Dreaded Sundown is shown at Spring Lake Park in the area for the Halloween season every year. Sponsored by the Texarkana Department of Parks and Recreation. The Phantom is a story that's specific to the Texarkana area, but as decades of crime history have shown us, this is a story that can happen anywhere and at any time. The Phantom became a part of pop culture both in Texarkana and horror around the world, but he wasn't gone for good.
Your great-grandpa and your great-grandma lived in this house when it happened. He was the boogeyman, they said. Can't catch the boogeyman.
On October 16, 2014, the Phantom returned in The Town That Dreaded Sundown, Oh boy, that's gonna get confusing. Directed by Alfonso Gomez Rejon, written by Roberto Aguirre Sacasa, and produced by Jason Blum and Ryan Murphy, under Blumhouse Productions and Ryan Murphy Productions. Easily the most interesting thing about Sundown 2014, let's call it that so we don't get confused, is that while it's a sequel to the original film, it shows Pierce's movie as just that, a movie, while the real Texarkana Moonlight Murders happened. Now taking place in 2013, the Phantom, or someone taking on his identity, returns to terrorize Texarkana once again.
This is for Mary. Make them remember.
So what this new film must deal with is the legacy of both the real murders and the film that turned them into entertainment. But this is a much more traditional slasher than Pierce's documentary approach. That's not surprising given that the first movie was made before the slasher was truly a thing, and this legacy sequel comes decades after many booms and busts of the subgenre. So of course that means bloody kills, sex scenes, a much more straightforward story structure, and a final girl. Here it's Addison Timlin as Jamie Lerner, whose boyfriend Corey is murdered as the first victim of the returning Phantom. Now, as the Phantom goes on a new spree, he torments her, pushing her to discover the truth while she investigates the past and present of the Town That Dreaded Sundown. Sundown 2014 does reckon with the legacy of the original film in real life a little, with the new Phantom copying the approach and timing of the original in their killings. And its Texarkana setting has a nice, sweaty feel, even with its fall and winter seasons here. But beyond its connection to the original, it doesn't have much to truly set it apart. This is a more intimate, straightforward movie. Jamie narrates from time to time, but as a personal reflection and not documentary voiceover. With films like The Blair Witch Project being inspired by Sundown more than most other slashers, what can a more traditional mass killer movie really do to carry on its legacy? Pierce's original movie taps into the fear and fascination that has led to true crime documentaries, podcasts, TV shows, and news reports being some of the most obsessively consumed pieces of media today. The slasher movie is adjacent to that, but nothing gets as close as this. While the original Town may be a somewhat forgotten but important stepping stone in horror history, Sundown 2014 is absolutely lost in the shuffle of modern horror because, despite both Blumhouse and Ryan Murphy being behind it, its release was absolutely botched when it was purchased for distribution by the long-defunct Orion Pictures, looking to make a comeback, and given multimedia distribution by the new BH Tilt imprint. The result was a few screenings at festivals and then straight to video, only making $120,000. So yeah, it's understandable if you've never seen this sequel, and why it will never replace the original film in the perceptions of horror fans. Sundown 2014 thankfully doesn't spoil the mystery of the original film. Frankly, I think it would be a little disrespectful for a totally fictional sequel to give the real-life Phantom an identity, when none was ever defined. The mystery of this new Phantom is the result of a secret sixth attack, with a man named Hank McCready killed and framed by the Phantom. It's his grandson, Deputy Foster, who is the new Phantom, alongside Corey, who had faked his death, looking to cement themselves in the history of Texarkana and never be forgotten, unlike McCready. And while 2014 hints at the idea that the Phantom will never truly be gone, we really do get closure here, because both Corey and Deputy Foster are shot and killed at the climax. I like this continuation, but I don't love it. It's really well shot by cinematographer Michael Goy, with a creepy soundtrack by Ludwig Göransson, and a solid lead in Timlin. But beyond that metatextual setup for its plot, it's not doing much you couldn't find elsewhere. What Pierce's original Town That Dreaded Sundown is tapping into is the fear that creeps in from the darkness on the edge of town. In Pierce's first film, The Legend of Boggy Creek, that was in the form of a cryptid birthed from real-life local legend. But Sundown is showing us the very real horror of what people will do to one another, and the ultimate unknowability of your neighbors, violating the peaceful coexistence of society in a small town. At night, the worst impulses of people come out, and here, in the shape of the Phantom, comes the worst of the worst. The 2014 sequel can never fully tap into that same fear, because it's both fully fictional and ultra-specific in the story it's trying to tell of one young woman trying to move past her own trauma and the legend that defines her home. With all the details of the Phantom laid bare and the legend put to rest, Sundown 2014 tries to provide closure and catharsis that the original film never could. But life rarely provides such easy, trustworthy answers. And in the end, a fictional sequel to a fictionalization of a series of unsolved murders is never really going to make real life any easier. Only time heals those wounds. And even then, a tragedy can leave a scar on a community that never really heals when new tragedies constantly remind us of the past. And just when we think we've moved beyond what hurts us, the past will come back to haunt us once again, like a phantom. Thanks for watching today's video and returning once again to horror with me. I find the Town That Dreaded Sundown to be such an interesting oddity within the larger history of horror. It's absolutely a pillar of the slasher subgenre, but is not often lumped in with the other movies that are commonly cited as forming it. It's also shaped like a documentary, but isn't a mockumentary. And while it can often be seen as a true crime recreation, it's also presenting itself as a fictional movie. And yet the Town That Dreaded Sundown is ultimately totally its own unique self. And that's really what I end up loving about it so much. There's nothing else quite like it. And I absolutely love its authentic atmosphere from the Texarkana area, and that gritty, low-budget, grainy look that only comes from a small group of independent filmmakers. It's the same reason why I love movies like the original Halloween, Mad Max, Phantasm, and The Evil Dead. This is pure independent creativity, and while all of those are the success stories and not the countless films that ended up failing over the years, it's a testament to independent filmmaking, true indie filmmaking, and I'll always love that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the original Town That Dreaded Sundown, as well as its belated sequel if you've seen it, as well as some of your favorite regional horror movies that are filmed in and dedicated to actual real-life locations, because there's nothing else like that. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons for their continued support, and if you'd like to be a patron, it's only $1 a month for early access to every video, as well as exclusive Patreon-only podcast reviews. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and seeking out some independent horror to watch.